Everybody, this is Mr. Wade, and it's coming to the grade 9 academic English class today to talk about the subject of alchemy. Alchemy is connected to the novel that we're studying, which is called The Alchemist. The Alchemist isn't really about alchemy, though. It just uses it metaphorically. But I thought that I could give a very quick overview of the subject on which the book is connected, and because it's a really interesting idea, and if it's an extended metaphor that applies to the book, I think we should understand what the metaphor means. So, what is alchemy? It's a really ancient concept. It goes back thousands of years, and it's connected to the meaning of the word. So, the ancient Greek word chemia is the art of changing metal. It's also an ancient Egyptian word, cheme, which means dark soil or Egypt itself. So the Arabic word alchemia is the art or the solution and division, or the Egyptian art. And it was practiced all over the ancient world: Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, Persia, China, Japan, Korea, Greece, and Rome. And also in the Middle Ages in the Islamic world and in Europe. So what was it? Very, very simply, it was a part of natural philosophy with two branches: a physical branch that involved trying to change the physical world, and an internal or spiritual branch that involved trying to change people's personalities. How did it work? Well, back then, people believed that the world was made out of four basic elements: earth, fire, air, water. But they also believed that those elements were based on one single common material called the prima materia, the first matter, also called the universal solvent. And everything was made out of this single material. And they believed that if you could find this material, you could find, in theory, something called the philosopher's stone. The philosopher's stone was a concentration of this material. And if you had the philosopher's stone, you could make everything. Now, today we have a much more complicated idea of what the world is made out of. Instead of four elements, we think that it's made of 118 elements. But it's important to understand that the idea is not that different from how we think of the world today. We still think of trying to understand what the world is made of, and we still think of trying to use that understanding to change our world. And I think that's what alchemy was. It looks foolish to us, but I almost think that it's not that they were foolish, it's that they didn't have the benefit of the tools and knowledge that we have today. Alchemy is still around. It's just has a different form and a different set of rules. So what's the philosopher's stone? It had many different names, and part of this has to do with the confusion surrounding alchemy. It wasn't exactly a science, and partly that's because alchemists were persecuted for hundreds of years. The authorities, in some parts of the world, persecuted them and executed them because they felt that what they were doing was a little bit dodgy. But the philosopher's stone is the essential ingredient for alchemy. And the alchemists of the Middle Ages took it so seriously, and they searched so hard for it, that there was a word for the search, and that was called the Alkahest. And there was an irony in the philosopher's stone, and that is that it's made of the substance from which the universe is made, but that this substance, although it's hard to find, it's actually everywhere, but it's hidden. So if you had the skill, you could find this common substance around you, and then you could change that common substance and find the philosopher's stone in that substance. So alchemy has several different forms. One is its actual use in history, and another one is its presence in stories or mythology. So historically, alchemy is connected with the science of changing metal. And this goes back thousands of years. Supposedly, 3500 BC, metallurgy started to be practiced, and peoples around the world started to um, mine and smelt metals, and it became a really important art and an industrial practice, even thousands of years ago. But then around 2,000 years ago, around 250 CE, it appears that people started to associate metallurgy with magic or spiritual um, mythological practices. So there was an ancient document called the Stockholm Papyrus, which actually contained recipes, not just for metallurgy, but that combined those recipes with astrology and magic. And this is the moment which a lot of scholars think is the beginning of the belief in alchemy. And this belief persisted for thousands of years until about 1640, when a guy called Robert Boyle created the science of modern chemistry and ended the idea of alchemy as a science. So nowadays we think of alchemy as a sort of a superstition and a really cool idea, but it's definitely not a science anymore. Then there's this practice of alchemy in literature, or the presence of alchemy in stories. And this goes back for thousands of years. There was a writer called Zosimos of Panopolis in ancient Greece who mentioned the philosopher's stone in one of his books. And around the same time, a church bishop called Clement of Alexandria referred to this mythical character called Hermes Trismegistus, who wrote all the 42 books of alchemic knowledge. And Hermes Trismegistus, nobody knows if he ever lived, but he is kind of like this Superman guy who knew everything about alchemy, how to do all the things that the alchemists were desperately trying to learn. And then a few hundred years later, there was a book called the Gloria Mundi, which was written anonymously in Germany, which advanced the idea that God himself gave the philosopher's stone to Adam shortly after God created Adam, and that Adam passed it down to all the biblical patriarchs. And this was an explanation for how these men in the Bible lived so long, because Adam and all of his descendants for a long time lived, hundreds and hundreds of years. So a lot of people in history wondered, if the Bible was true, then how could Adam live 900 years? How could all these guys live so long? So the Gloria Mundi said, it's the philosopher's stone. It's because God gave them the philosopher's stone. So what is the goal of alchemy? Well, the goal of external alchemy is to change materials to make them perfect. And this is called the chrysopoeia, the changing of base materials like iron and lead into noble materials like gold. So that's one of the purposes of external alchemy, to be able to take your philosopher's stone and to take something very ordinary like lead and make it into gold. And gold was amazing. Gold is not only beautiful, but it lasts forever, and it doesn't rust, it doesn't tarnish, and it can be beaten into endless shapes, and it's like really, really cool. The other purpose of external alchemy was to create elixirs, an elixir of immortality, which would let you live forever, and also an elixir of healing called the panacea. The the name of this is called the masterwork, so, or the magnum opus. To use the philosopher's stone to create panaceas in order to perfect your body and your soul. And one of the consequences of this process is something called gnosis. So if you used the philosopher's stone to create these panaceas and these healing elixirs, it would also give you special insight into yourself. You would know yourself perfectly. You would understand your role. You would understand who you were. You would understand your role in the universe. And this is called self-knowledge or experiential knowledge. There are lots of other kinds of knowledge There was practical knowledge about how to do things and theoretical knowledge about how, the universe or nature worked. But this gnosis is a special kind of knowledge that people were really thirsty for. How does alchemy happen? Essentially, it's heating. You find your base material, your prime material, and you put it into a pear-shaped glass and you heat it up in what this glass, which is called the philosopher's egg, and you wait for it to turn the right color. If it's black, that means that the old material is dying. Once it becomes white, you can touch your philosopher's stone to it and it will become silver. And if it becomes red and you touch your philosopher's stone to it, it can become gold. Now, this seems silly to us, this idea of finding the base material, but it's that I think is what we're doing today with the Hadron super collider in France, I think, or in Switzerland, and there's several other super colliders around the world. But this whole idea of finding the base material and doing stuff with it is something that we're still searching for. Um, so you can actually find diagrams of the alchemical system that is used to achieve this, and these are written in these ancient documents, and it's really kind of interesting how they thought of this. Because alchemists were persecuted around the world, they they had to hide their activities by coding their recipes using special symbols that only they understood, and hiding their practices in secret societies. And so alchemy became associated with very weird and almost dodgy ideas, and alchemists were seen as very sort of mysterious, um, intelligent, brilliant, mystical people. And in the Middle Ages, this persecution reached sort of a high level. Medieval authorities persecuted the alchemists, who then kept their activities a secret because they were afraid of this persecution. The Pope banned them. Cistercian monks spoke out against them. Henry IV of England persecuted them. And the main reason why they were persecuted is because the alchemists offered, or they were searching for some kind of perfection in a way that did not coincide with how the church was advising people to be perfect. So if you lived in the Middle Ages, there was really essentially one way to perfect yourself, and that was by being a member of the church and following the instructions of the church leaders. Also, the idea of people going around and making gold out of lead probably would have been considered kind of threatening by, kings of the time. This changed in the Renaissance a few hundred years later, where um, the the ideas were a lot more open, and there was a much greater interest in the occult and in mysticism and in mythology and ancient practices. So Elizabeth I and Rudolph II in England and in the Holy Roman Emperor each hired their own alchemists to um, to practice alchemy in their courts, and this reflected sort of a new open idea. There was a lot more practice of alchemy, and this probably led to some genuine benefits that we are actually experiencing today. So, although alchemy never managed to find a way to create gold out of base metals, it had some side effects that were related to science. It launched the beginning of modern chemistry, modern metallurgy, and also modern pharmacology. It also led to this idea of what we would call today as spiritual alchemy, or really just self-help, self-improvement. So, what about alchemy and modern science? Modern science benefited from the practice of the alchemists because they helped develop the structure of basic lab techniques, basic theory, basic terminology, and a basic experimental method. This is a picture of an Islamic medieval alchemist called Jabir ibn Hayyan, who was one of these alchemical fathers, and his works date back to 800 AD. And so, even though the alchemists did not succeed, they contributed to science, the science of ore testing, refining, metalworking, and also the production of gunpowder, ink, dyes, paints, cosmetics, leather tanning, ceramics, glass manufacture, extracts, liquors, etc. And I also mentioned the modern practice of pharmacology, or the creating of healing drugs. Um, so it's strange because we can look back on alchemy and think, okay, this is ridiculous, but we can also remember that their obsession with this unattainable goal of creating gold out of base metals led to a lot of side benefits that we enjoy today. But what about the other side of alchemy, the practice of spiritual alchemy? And what does that even mean? Spiritual alchemy was a, another side of alchemy that kind of developed at the same time. And it was this belief that alchemy is actually not about metal at all, that the attempt to create gold out of base metals is not really what it's about. It's missing the point. In fact, alchemy is a metaphor. It's not about changing metal to become noble, it's about changing people to become noble. The metal itself is a metaphor of the soul. And what you're really trying to do is find a way to turn your soul from being a very low person to being a very elevated person. And the philosopher's stone is not a real stone. It's really just a metaphor for a secret. And it's a secret that is hidden, but it's hidden in plain sight. The philosopher's stone is actually accessible to anyone that's really looking for it. And anyone can transform their soul into being, better. So alchemy is really about happiness. It's really about becoming a better person. So this is not a new idea. There were a number of writers that wrote about this. There was a guy called Paracelsus who wrote a book called The Alchemical Catechism. There was a Persian philosopher called Al-Ghazali in the 11th century who wrote a book called The Alchemy of Happiness. And so this is the idea, I think, that is at the root of The Alchemist, which is a novel that we want to look at in the next couple of weeks. So how does this relate, all of this relate to The Alchemist? It's a book essentially about finding your purpose or happiness. It's essentially a book about spiritual alchemy. So that's all I wanted to say about that. And I think I'll have some questions to follow. Okay, thank you very much.